Welcome back to Inside City Hall, where we are turning back to the unraveling situation on Rikers Island. Earlier this week, State Attorney General Letitia James and the district attorneys of Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Queens all visited the jail complex following the death of another Rikers inmate on Sunday. As the humanitarian crisis worsens, one important piece of the puzzle is what prosecutors can do to help ease overcrowding inside the facility. Joining me now to talk about this and more is Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez, one of the first DAs in the state to voice support for the Less is More Act, which was signed by Governor Hochul last Friday. Thanks for being here, DA Gonzalez. We'll talk about the Less is More Act in just a few minutes. But first, tell me about your visit to Rikers earlier this week. I know other elected officials have not gotten the sanitized version of Rikers. They've really seen some of the squalid conditions and the chaos up close. What was your visit like? What did you see?
Well, Bobby, thank you for having me on. I was troubled by what I saw. I was informed by both corrections officers and administration at Rikers that things had improved and my visit may have been more sanitized. There was a new admissions port that had opened, and so people were moving pretty freely through there. But I still witnessed, lack of corrections officers on the ground. There was still the need for more of the COs to be present and at work. I saw a vulnerable inmates with, cast on their arms or their legs, residing in gyms, and the COVID protocols that we witnessed, where there were a lot of men in a cell, in excess of 30, without any kind of ability to sit down, lay down. It was not a good scene. And so that is the improved version. I can't imagine what my colleagues saw a week earlier.
Yeah, well, Rikers has always been dysfunctional, I guess is a mild way of putting it. It's always been a problem. So, for people who haven't been following this, what is different now that we're now seeing Rikers detainees dying on a regular basis? A lot of blame has been laid at the feet of corrections officers, a lot of whom are simply not showing up to work. Is that the primary problem here?
It appears that there's a staffing issue as well as simple overcrowding. As the jail facilities have shrunk in preparation for closing Rikers, there seems to be a lot of people who have been detained in closer proximity. And we had, during COVID, really lowered the jail population. And now the jail population has gone back up about another 1,500 people. And so there's a sense that it's overcrowded. And we're hearing that like at least 2,000 COs are not making it into jail. But let's be clear, Rikers, and I've visited Rikers many times as a prosecutor, it's always been a difficult visit. It's always been difficult to see, so many Black and brown men behind cages, locked up waiting for court dates. It's more difficult now because when we were speaking to inmates, we're hearing that they're not getting the food, the sanitation, and really the access to medical care that we would, insist that every citizen of our, city gets.
I've heard you in your office talk about the need for outside intervention. There's a federal monitor that was assigned years ago to oversee Rikers. Should that monitor be doing more? What kind of intervention do you think might be necessary?
Well, it's a good point. There's a federal monitor that's been in place to monitor violence on the island. We're being told that both the people being detained on the island and our corrections officers do not feel safe. The staffing issues play a big role in the inability to secure locations. We witnessed firsthand cells that didn't close and areas that were not appropriately staffed. And there's a federal monitor that's, has oversight over Rikers Island. I know that the monitor had previously said that he thought the city and Department of Corrections should maintain control. I think there's a status report with the federal judge tomorrow, and I really think the time may have come for the judge to order a staffing plan and safety protocols so that we can protect both the people who have been detained on the island, but also our corrections officers.
So to the extent that there is now overcrowding and that we've seen an increase in the number of detainees, I think some people might look at DAs and say, well, isn't that your responsibility. You're the ones who are requesting bail and sending people to jail. So what can you do? I mean, is this simply a function of crime having increased in the past year, and that's the reason we're seeing the population go up?
I think there are a lot of reasons, but I should say that, district attorneys in this city have done a tremendous job in helping to reduce the Rikers population. It was only a few years ago that population at Rikers Island was 11,000. It went down to 10,000. And in my tenure as a district attorney, we've reduced that population by half. So we've done a good job in being more responsible when we ask for bail. Obviously, bail reform played an important role. And I think that people need to understand that as the jail population has shrunk, as we've gotten it down, during COVID, it's about 4,500 people. Currently, it's about 6,000. The percentage of people who are being held in on violent felonies have increased. We don't have people in there on many nonviolent cases. And most of the people that are on are in pretty significant cases where public safety is a big issue. Like, for example, in my county, we estimate about 65% of the people that are on Rikers Island are charged with either a Class A or B violent felony.
So some people are also on Rikers on parole violations, in some cases technical parole violations, but this new legislation that was signed by Governor Hochul last Friday is intended to fix that problem, right? This is the less is more bill.
Yeah, a big supporter of less is more. Myself and Cy Vance and Darcel Clark, a few years ago, we championed the legislation. We wrote an op-ed, we supported, we went up to Albany. So it's a good news that happened. That's part of how I said that DAs have really attempted to bring down the jail population. We're training our assistant DAs not to ask for bail unless it's, we believe it necessary for public safety and for the person to return back to court. But less is more plays an important role. And I think for folks who don't know what it really means is that there are people who are being sent to Rikers Island waiting for a parole hearing, and they wind up serving more time waiting for the hearing than they would have ever received for the sanction on parole, because these are not new crimes. These are things like being late, or if you've been told not to drive and you get caught driving, you may be sanctioned. Less is more will not make the city less safe. It will save money and it will help with overcrowding. I want to be real clear, Bobby. Part of the solution to fixing Rikers right now is reducing population on the island and demanding that we have our staffing levels return to appropriate levels. So DAs do play a role in that, but the DAs have come a long way in terms of helping to reduce the population.
There have been some calls to release all detainees from Rikers, notably from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman. The mayor, of course, dismissed that idea out of hand. What's your response to hearing a proposal like that?
It's aspirational that one day our society will be sufficiently well behaved that we don't need jails or prisons. In my community of Brooklyn, we know that so many of the people that are on the island are there because they've committed really serious crimes. And if we were to close Rikers Island today, there would be no place for them to go. I've heard calls about having folks on electronic monitoring, but people are somewhat misinformed because under the criminal procedure law, we're not able to do that. We have the capacity maybe to have 150 people on monitoring. The sheriff's department has to do the monitoring. They don't have the personnel or the equipment to do it. You couldn't put 6,000 people on EM or even 3,000 people. So there's a lot to do. What I'm doing in my office, and I think what my colleagues are also looking at, is are there any people on the island right now who shouldn't be there, and what can we do to help them get off? Can we go to court? So defenders in Brooklyn have reached out to my office. We're starting to get writs and we're going to court. I'm paying attention to people who are in on low amounts of bail and people who are medically vulnerable, as well as people who are close to finishing their sentence and advocating for their release.
Mayor de Blasio has come under a lot of criticism for his handling of this, but the mayor does support closing Rikers Island and building 4 jails around the boroughs, 4 community jails, I think they're referred to. But that's years away. Do you support that plan, and do you see that as a solution, albeit a long-term one?
I think Rikers Island should close. I supported borough-based jails. I think they're better for the administration of justice. The Rikers Island is being neglected. There's not a lot of money being put to make sure that the facilities are safe or maintained well. And having people locally based makes a lot of sense to me. We had a jail in Brooklyn. It's under, I guess it's been dismantled. And my understanding is that these solutions are, many, many years away, 5 or 6 years away, before we could really talk about housing people locally. So we have to figure it out now. But I don't believe that the overwhelming majority of the residents of the city would support releasing everyone, regardless of what crime they're accused of committing and what the evidence is against them.
Do you believe that the mayor should have acted or should act more decisively to confront this?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. This didn't happen overnight. This was something that took a while to reach the crisis that it reached. There are a lot of responsible parties, not just the mayor's office. And I know that, in the last, few weeks, there's been a lot of attention paid to try to make things better. There's been some progress, but not enough. And no one should get a free pass.
All right, DA Eric Gonzalez, thank you so much for taking some time to join us tonight.